Good morning. Welcome to Magdala. It's raining outside, so I don't want to expose the phone to the rain. So we're indoors today. We'll do a beautiful recap of the interior of Duc In Altum. And somebody's going to use this chapel for prayer now, so I'd like to just start here. And this is the call of the first disciples. We have 4 little chapels, and each of them have fantastic mosaics with 160,000 pieces of Murano glass. Masterpieces of art by Maria Jesus Fernandez. And here we're looking at the village of Capernaum, which is actually in this direction. It's just out here to the right, about 4 miles away. We often see it on the sunrise stroll and chat. And here we have Peter and Andrew, fishermen, and Jesus is inviting them to come follow him because he's saying, "Come after me and I will make you fishers of people." And then we see 2 more brothers leaving their family, their parents and the workers and their boats, and they're following Jesus. And then we see the birds flying north. So it's springtime, they're coming back from Africa on this extraordinary trip that they do twice a year. It's amazing how these hands take on a different angle, a different impression. Here they seem very elongated, and from another angle they seem very short. So Jesus' first disciples were one here at the Sea of Galilee. And we're looking out at the sea now. It's windy outside and gusty, I would say, and squalls. Sometimes with heavy rain, sometimes just drizzling. We're promised rain the entire day. You can see how it's wet out there. So we're in the boat altar chapel, looking out at the Sea of Galilee. And this boat altar is sitting on marble, which was chosen by the artist from Norway. And it gives the impression that the boat's on the water. So when we're looking outside, let me fix this for you a little bit. From here, the person inside has the impression that the boat's on the Sea of Galilee, especially when the infinity pool is filled with water. It looks like a continuum. Tomorrow, God willing, say a prayer, we're opening the guest house again, so we're looking forward to all of you coming back eventually. For the moment, it will be obviously primarily and only Israeli people who are coming in, Israeli-based people, because they're here. And they also want to get outdoors and get a break from all the lockdowns. So we anticipate having guests. Say a prayer for us, because in order to employ all the staff that's needed, then we need a certain volume of guests. And so there's it's quite a step out into trust that this will be blessed and that we'll be able to provide the salaries for the employees who also need work to earn something for their families. Yeah, it's raining nicely out there now. We don't get to see too much rain here in the overall picture of the year. We're actually coming to the end of the time of probable rainfall, because in April it's very rare, and in May it never happens. It's like a complete exception. And then we won't have rain again until maybe a little drizzle, a few drops into September, but hardly anything. And then really November is when it will start again. So here, as we're in here in this spot here, we can look at these icons. It's an icon of Jesus, classical style. The icons usually they're not jocose, okay? They're looking at the solemnity of the religious mystery in a very powerful way. It's also a very set way. There's a great icon tradition, the way icons are supposed to be made. And this one is written in Greek here, which is also not screen here, people. Oh, there we are. So, let me put this down for you a second. I was carrying it, and it'll be easier to present this. I open up the tripod here. Where did we go? Oh, here we are. So the first word is E-N, the Greek letters. It means N. And then it's arche. They have the same word in archetype and archaeology and architect. So it's in the beginning, in arche. In was, it's a different N. It's the verb to be. Hologos, in the beginning, was the word. Kai holokos, and the word was God. No, one second. I'm missing a word there. The word was pros tonteo, and the word was with God. Kai theos, oh, there's very clear. Kai theos in hologos, and God was the word, or the word was God. And in the beginning, he was in the beginning, in arche. He himself was pros tonteon. He was in God's presence, in the presence of the Father. Panton di auto egeneto, everything. Panta, pantheon, pantheism. Di auto, through him, egeneto, came to be. Geneto, egeneto, you hear the word Genesis there. Generation, egeneto. Kai horis auto, and outside of him, egeneto ude enogen. Nothing came to be which was. So everything was created through him. The first words of John's Gospel. And here we have Simon Peter. We saw that fisherman who was invited by Jesus to come and follow him. And you know what a character Peter was. he was married, he had a mother-in-law, and he had a quick response always. He was very forward, very energetic, physically and spiritually, and in relationships socially. But he had a lot to learn, especially about his own weaknesses. And Jesus wasn't fazed by his weakness. And you can see the halo indicating that he became a saint. Even though he denied Jesus 3 times, he became deeply reformed in his person, deeply renewed. He became a new man in Christ. And there we see the letters in his hand, the letters of Peter, and the keys of the kingdom, reminding us of Matthew 16, up near Mount Hermon, at the beginning of the Jordan River. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Blessed are you, Simon, son of Peter, son of Jonah. You have not known this through human flesh, but from my Father. You are a rock, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Amazing what God's plan is for humankind, that we can be called to, despite all our weakness and brokenness and infidelities, God calls us to definitive sanctity. And Peter ended up crucified. He actually was crucified upside down, because he didn't consider himself worthy to be crucified like Christ was crucified. What an amazing development in his person. And he had wanted to get a sword to defend Jesus in Gethsemane. And before that ever came, he wanted to dissuade Jesus from being crucified. How a fiery personality, prompt to action, very primary, can become so deep, so pondered. And then how Jesus could take this fisherman from the Sea of Galilee and bring him to Rome, to the heart of the empire, to proclaim the gospel there, especially by his martyrdom. Something which has really made such a mark on humankind's memory. God's plan in our lives, it's really amazing. We contemplate that God wants us to become great saints. Normal people with normal feet and toes, in normal relationships, in family. How many times would Peter have come to this port with fish as a young fellow, as a child, first of all with his dad, with his uncle, with his grandpa. They've pulled in a boat here and hauled in the fish and sold it, gone back happy home. Maybe got some nice things here in Magdala from their fish purchase, some things they needed in the family, some things Peter's wife or his mother-in-law asked him to get. Normal family life, you know, there's where God is acting, where God's involved. Sorry for that, there was a little glitch with the Wi-Fi there. And every one of these guys has their own story, you know. James, the son of Zebedee, and Bartholomew. And James of Alphaeus. We have such a variety of characters, and here is Judas clutching the purse, and Very sad, you know. There's no halo. His name is not written in gold. But he was a pillar in the community. Who do you put in charge of the resources of a community? Somebody of trust, somebody of great ability. Even in a simple club, the treasurer. Some people are disturbed that we have this image here. I can understand that. Other people are very happy about the realism of having him here. You see, our apostles here actually are not presented here as it's really before Jerusalem. They're here because they're with Jesus in Galilee. So the basic idea is all of Duc In Altum is to show Jesus' public ministry at the Sea of Galilee in action, teaching from the boat, healing, and so forth, encountering the people. So it's his public life in action. In each of the holy sites in the Holy Land, each place has its own particular message or theme or event. And Mount Tabor is the Transfiguration, and Bethlehem is the birth, and you can guess the other ones easily, you know. Capernaum is Peter's house, where Peter lived, where Jesus was based in his public ministry. The Mount of Beatitudes, the message of the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount. Tabcha, the multiplication of the loaves and fish. And here our theme is Jesus actively proclaiming the gospel, healing, encountering the people, this type of message. So these apostles are still very much in the raw. Having chosen the form of icon, it has some classical rules, so there had to be a halo, but actually Father Juan's drive about this was that they're not saints yet, they're men in the raw who need a lot of transformation. And usually the men are taking a longer time than the women. The women seem to respond much more readily, with greater completeness, but also women need their time to transform and mature. But in the men, it's very obvious that they just are slow starters religiously many times. So when people are very disturbed about having the image of Judas here, I say to them, look, all these pillars here, you know, how many times we see today and also through history where pillars of the church have not lived up to their mission and maybe been a source of scandal and of major difficulty for the church, for Christ's body. So that's a very realistic reminder. And from the very beginning, Jesus himself had to deal with this. And then that raises the next question. Well, could it happen to me? Could it happen that somebody that has enormous responsibility, like a parent in a family for the children's faith, that a parent could abandon the faith or interiorly be corrupted through alcohol, substance abuse, infidelity, dishonesty, so many different ways to be broken down and collapse and be a counter-testimony. And that's a very important consideration, because then I need to be on my knees and say, Lord, protect me. Protect me from my passions, from evil. Deliver us from evil. We can't forget, no matter how much we're praying today and how close we may feel to Jesus and be with him in the boat even, crossing the Sea of Galilee, that we are very exposed to breakdown. That's the way we are as human beings. And so we need to pray that we will not be led into temptation, that we will be not fall into temptation, that we will not endanger ourselves by playing with fire. You know how you protect a child when they're playing with fire. And the second major light that has come to me with the presence of this image of Judas here is that it's asking me, how will I react when a major pillar of the church near me, maybe somebody in my community, maybe somebody locally in the church or worldwide in the church, when somebody fails, how will I treat them? When somebody abandons Christ, how will I treat them? Will I take out my revolver and dispatch them? Or my sword? And then I have to say, Jesus, how did you treat Judas? How do I want to treat a potential Judas who could do so much damage? How did you treat him? And it's amazing, to see Jesus' ability to deal with him right up to that kiss at Calvary, at Gethsemane. He allowed him to kiss him into betrayal. Jesus' patience is amazing. And I imagine his prayer for him. It's a huge mystery there of Judas. And here we have a different character that's also very interesting. And I love the fact that he's right here beside Matthew. Matthew was a tax collector. And as such, then, he was really in the employment of the Romans, but maybe through Herod. So you had the Herodians, and they weren't friendly to Jesus at all. And then you had the issue that he was a tax collector, so there wasn't a single Jewish person that would applaud him, except his own boss, because he'd be getting a cut of the action. So they hated him. Tax collectors were hated. And Jesus called him to be an apostle. And he even wrote the gospel, a major work documenting Jesus' event in humanity. And he's right beside Simon the Zealot. And what's the Zealot? These were the revolutionaries. These are the ones that want to throw off the Romans. And he suffered tremendously, as is indicated by this instrument of his torture, a saw, an extraordinary martyr for Christ. And here we have the two of them with their great witness to Jesus, side by side, in Jesus' community from the opposite ends of the political spectrum. And in Jesus, in the love of Jesus and as disciples of Jesus, they were reconciled. How much we need reconciliation of political counterparts in deep opposition, sometimes leaders of civil wars in countries. They can be military type of wars, or they can be cultural wars, they can be philosophical wars, they can be obviously in the nature of politics, how to run the city, how to run the polis, that's where it comes from, politics, how to run the polis. And it's a major role that has to be played, that society needs. We need people who organize the life of the city, the polis, and therefore we have policy and politics, and the life of the country, and the life in the world between countries. So we need people of great moral stature and caliber. And we need to pray a lot for people in politics, because once you're handling money, or once you're handling power in politics, or ownership of business, all of these positions also pose great temptations. And when we don't see them as acts of service, but we see them as acts of power, acts of self-interest. And there's something about women, and here we're in the atrium of the women, that women have a natural tendency to love, to be compassionate, to protect their little child, to look out for the vulnerable, for the sick. That's something extraordinary about women, to see the people that are in trouble, to give a helping hand. Obviously men do this as well, but women have a great tendency immediately to be compassionate, to dry tears, to stench bleeding wounds, to console, to listen, to the stories of the others. And here, this is the most beautiful part of Duc In Altum, the central part of the building, and also the most complex architectural part of the building. When people see this first, they think, well, this has to be a circle. But actually, it's an octagon. If you count the sides, it's 8 sides. There's 1, and there's 2, and there's 3, and there's 4. Now we have 4 more. There's 1, there's 2, there's 3, and there's 4. So we have 8 sides, as also the baptismal font is octagonal at its base. And that's the basic structure of the space, but it contains a big circle, which we could see better if we go outside here, I think. The circle is formed primarily through the existence of the dome, and then it's carried down to the floor through the columns. And the mosaic ribbon uniting the columns then emphasizes the circularity of the space. It's then really like a cylinder, because it's just a circle on the floor, it's a circle up here, and it has a dome, and the columns are dedicated to the women, to honor them, the great women of the gospel story. Mary Magdalene, the first witness of Christ risen from the dead. And we will be celebrating her festivity here on the Saturday of Easter week, the Saturday after Easter Sunday. So keep your eyes open for announcements about that. And Mary Magdalene wasn't alone. She was with Susanna and Johanna, great women of the gospel story. Here we have Jairus and his daughter, his wife and daughter, who was very sick, and Jesus raised her from the dead. We leave that for another day. Our time is more or less up. I haven't commented the readings from today, but in the readings from today we have the story of the 3 young men in the furnace, and they professed their faith against the threats of the king, and they persevered inside the furnace, and the king came to recognize the veracity of God, the truth of God, that God, the God of these young men, is the true God. And they were willing to expose themselves to the fire and not deny God. So people, our time is up, and maybe some people are going through a very difficult time, maybe not as physically bad as the fire, or maybe yes, because of cancer, maybe because of major economic distress, and to remain in fidelity to God, in trust in Him, in prayerful turning to God, imploring His help. And the tensions can be very tough. We see the great tensions in the gospel between Jesus and the leaders of some of the religious leaders, because some of them also were with Jesus, but some key religious leaders were against him in Jerusalem, and that was preparing for the final showdown, which culminated in the crucifixion. And yet, after Pentecost, hundreds of them accepted the faith. So Jesus has that patience to go through suffering like the 3 young men, to win others for the mystery of God. People, thank you for joining us today. This is a different type of morning. Outside still exists. You can see green. and mount our bell. But it's very wet, so another day we'll be outside in the sun, God willing. Thank you for joining us today in the beauty of Magdala, where the Lord is encountering many people even in these times of lockdown. God bless you. Great to have you here this morning. See you later, alligators.